Hello, and welcome to episode number 261 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have two of those bright minds in Pat Evans and Sam McQuillan. Boys, thanks for the time today. We are post-Super Bowl, so we will hit on that with Sam to see what things maybe looked like over there for the Sportsbook. Pat's going to let us know what's going on in the online casino, as well as just our normal state roundup and some interesting stonk stuff going on out there. You know, hashtag we are not stonk advisors. So just let you know, we're just letting you know what's going on out there. This is not financial advice. Do not take anything that we have to say on this into your own personal life and spend any of your cash. And we'll wrap things up here, just kind of talking about sportsbooks in general as we kind of move forward into this era of what's next. What can they do? What is out there for the consumers, and maybe to drum up some sort of business. But as we said, Sam, the Super Bowl has come and gone. And what is the kind of early scuttlebutt out there from the sportsbooks?
Yeah, it's crazy. It already feels like it happened, like, I don't know, months ago. But
I know.
We're already
it's like a
moving
week
on
and a
to
half
college
ago.
basketball. Yeah. We're already moving on to college basketball, and investors are already moving on to how the sports books are doing post Super Bowl. But if anybody remembers, the Eagles won in pretty big fashion, 40-22. Against the Chiefs, which was an upset. The Chiefs were favored. Most of the money was on the Chiefs. Not an overwhelming amount, but pretty much across the board, except in Pennsylvania. Obviously, there was a lot of Philly bettors there. But the Chiefs were also one of I think they were the most bet team in terms of future bets to win the Super Bowl as well. So the books did well in terms of that. But when you look at kind of the surface level, they lost on the spread, they lost on the money line, and they lost on the game total with it going over, higher scoring game. So traditionally, in the past, you would probably say that the books had a big loss on the Super Bowl because they got killed on the major markets. But what actually is the story so far, what we're seeing with what the books are saying, with what the states are saying, is that it looks like it was the most profitable Super Bowl ever for not just the DraftKings of the world, not just the FanDuels of the world, but the in-person books in Las Vegas as well, which I think is a good distinction here, because when we get into why the online sports betting companies did so well, a lot of it, is player props and same game parlays, stuff that isn't as big in Vegas. They don't have as much capabilities to offer that. It's a lot more big bets getting down as well. But yeah, BetMGM says it was the most money they ever took on a single event and the most money they ever made. They were like, saying, this is great. DraftKings came out in the earnings call this week and said that they made $436 million in revenue. So basically a 13% hold on the game, which is pretty high. So it was great for the sports books because everyone bet on Saquon Barkley to score a touchdown. He was minus 190 to minus 200 across the board. He scored in like every game in the playoffs. He was on a tear. And then the Super Bowl comes around. Everyone predicts, if the Eagles are going to win, you're going to have to give the ball to Saquon. He's going to have a really big game. And of course, that's not what happened at all. The Eagles ended up blowing out the Chiefs. Saquon barely got the ball. Travis Kelce didn't score either. A lot of the sports books talked about, how popular he's been. A lot of people thinking, playoff Kelce's going to come alive. A lot of popularity with Taylor Swift. So the books made out like bandits, really, with the same game parlays and the player props that didn't hit, despite losing on these major markets. Interesting enough, Vegas actually took 20% less money on the Super Bowl this year, the state of Nevada, I should say, than they did last year. A lot of that has to do with kind of overall the tourism industry being down in Vegas. Rooms are down a little bit. The weather hasn't been as good. But they still made the most money they ever have. So that's a pretty big distinction. It took 20%
The game was
less.
here last year as well. So you got people in town for all of that.
100%. Yeah. So we're seeing the same thing in New York. They made, I think the books had like a 40-something% hold rate in New York, which is just crazy. New York has lost about $40 million. So it was a really good day for the books. Some of what Wall Street was more kind of what you're hearing on Wall Street, what they're more encouraged about besides just a really good single game is the customer growth. FanDuel had 16 million bets, which was up about 20%. 3 million bettors. DraftKings posted similar numbers, 12 million bets and 2.5 million bettors. So a lot of the stock experts or people who really care about this stuff financially, they're focused on this being a huge growth opportunity. FanDuel had their kick of destiny. You get new customers every year with this kind of event. And now the next step is going to be how do they grow it? now that football's over, you got March Madness, another big event coming around. And just one more thing I want to hit on this is the first time ever, Polymarket, they took $1.1 billion in, I guess you could call them wagers, contracts, basically money that was handled on the game. Polymarket being one of those derivative markets that has launched these trading events that look very close to sports betting, but you're basically buying what side will win the game. Kalshi took $27 million on the game. So we're already seeing it's pretty popular to use these platforms. We'll see how much that lasts, and then how much, the books kind of care about that. And, we'll get into all the CFTC stuff later on. But it was a good Super Bowl for everybody, besides the bettors.
Yeah, Pat, it was a deal where if you hear a Super Bowl had 62 points, you are thinking, okay, Sportsbooks got absolutely neutered in this thing. And I was actually on air for the Super Bowl. I ended up talking to a few different sportsbook directors after the game, and every one of them were just like, you could tell even over the phone, they were doing backflips in their office, because you're sitting here and it's like, Mahomes under rushing, like that was over rushing was a huge deal. Kareem Hunt unders on everything. Samaje
like 3 carries.
Like unders on everything. Saquon was under by 50 yards on his rushing prop, right? Weirdly, Jalen Hurts passing was bet under. And so it actually goes over late in the game to over 221. So that prop that typically you're thinking overs are bad, that one was actually a little bit of liability towards the under. That goes over. That gets home for them. I mean, really everything just went absolutely perfect for the sports books here in a Super Bowl game that, again, had 62 points, and you would think like, oh my God, they got destroyed. And instead they're all like, grinning ear to ear, talking about what an amazing game it was.
Yeah. It really seems like it was a perfect storm for the books, except I think the one thing that I think is fun to think about is Missouri. You got a legal market that isn't launched yet that was home to the team that lost. That I wonder what that could have done for the sports books. If you look at what would have happened if Missouri had launched in time for the Super Bowl. Which,
like the week before or the day of.
Right. Like that could have been even more insane.
Yeah, I'm just, and Sam, as you mentioned, what that does too is not only do all of those props on an individual basis not hit, but then those are all tied into every same game parlay there is, right? So like, even though Mahomes got there on his passing yards late in the game, that is almost always going to be tethered to something with Travis Kelce or something.
I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, even though that got there, it's still going to kill the SGP because it wasn't actually correlated to one of the major players doing anything in this, unless you had Xavier Worthy and it was just a 2-legger, and so most people don't do the 2-leg same game parlays. And so with that, it's just, again, I keep saying this, but I was just blown away as I'm tallying things up at the end of the game going, oh my God, that one didn't hit and that one didn't hit and that one didn't. That one did hit, but everyone was thinking the other way on that one. And that was sort of like, oh my God, this is just so crazy. And sure enough, what we thought was going to happen did happen. And that's the sportsbook walking away really, really happy.
Yeah. And I will just add right there that same game parlay handle at DraftKings was up 40% versus last Super Bowl. So tells you everything you need to know.
That is all you need to know for sure. Pat, we talk a lot about kind of the next steps for some of these operators out there. And we know online casino is certainly something that they've had in their sights for a very, very long time. Sure, Sportsbooks keeps the light on, pays the bills, but online casino we know is something that could really maybe make some of these companies blow up. So like to kind of keep up with that as we move along. So we got a few updates here from a few different states.
Yeah, to your point, this is, we've gone through the big wave of legalizing sports betting. That's the companies have seen their huge customer acquisition in openings in almost all the markets available, except for Missouri, and we've got a couple of states that we'll touch on later thinking about it this year. And so now they're turning to online casino. And this year we've seen a ton of bills introduced in legislators across the country. And unfortunately for the industry, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of momentum right now for that. Part of the issue is, I'll get to this story first, several regional casino brands, companies, including Cordish companies, Churchill Downs, Jack's in Ohio, a couple others, have launched the National Association Against iGaming. And we've seen the companies like Cordish come out in Maryland and Louisiana against online casino expansion, saying we don't want to cannibalize that brick and mortar revenue. We don't want to, fire employees because we don't have money at the casinos anymore and the like. But it has been it's been centralized and a coordinated effort. But now it really is with this organization. They put out a big study kind of highlighting the negatives and that they want to be good for local economies and good for employment and the like. And so this is kind of, we've seen the big casino companies, Caesars, MGM, FanDuel, DraftKings, say, the cannibalization argument isn't real. These guys come out and say it is real. So there's two distinct houses here of thought, and so they're going to continue to battle. We'll start in Indiana, which, before a little moratorium last year because of some convictions related to online or gambling legislation, it was kind of viewed as the next logical step for online casino expansion. Again, there was a moratorium on gambling legislation last year that came back this year. It passed a committee. Senate and House leadership were like, let's consider this. This is something we can consider, but we got to get it right. Then it didn't pass the House leadership came out last week and said, we're done. We're not considering this anymore this year. We got to get it right. So that's done. New York, again, kind of an effort to try to get it to passage. They need revenue in the state. Again, a head legislator came out of the gaming committee and said, no, we need to think about this. We'll talk about it, but we need to get it right. Very highly doubtful anything happens this year. So again, just kind of slow rolling, a lot of education, kind of the same thing happened in Maryland. We've had a couple of hearings. It passed the House last year, might pass the House again this year. But there's a lot of just discussions going on. I think it was a 6-hour hearing earlier this month about kind of the benefits and drawbacks of going live. You had, both those houses I was talking about earlier saying these are the benefits of doing it. And then you had the other casino companies and labor unions coming out saying, no, we can't do this yet. These are why we can't do this. So it's going to be a slow slog for this expansion versus the just blitz we saw in sports betting.
Sam, I've thought a lot about this, obviously, since we've been covering all of this for years now. And the two biggest things we always get about online casinos, one, cannibalization of the brick and mortar, and then also problem gambling stuff. And so I've always said this, we certainly should always have safeguards in place for problem gambling and all of that, but I don't think you should legislate off of worst case scenario type of stuff, right? Because again, there are the vast majority of people who do it responsibly and stay within their means or whatever. And so to say we can't do something for the very small minority of that, I think is kind of misguided. And then also as far as the cannibalization stuff, like, I think we have to get to a point with some of these people and make them understand that if I'm sitting at home in my underwear on my couch and I'm like, I wouldn't mind like playing blackjack for like 30 minutes or something like that. That is not preventing me from going and doing it at the casino that literally I live, I live in Las Vegas. So, I live in there's a casino that if I really wanted to, I could walk to. I will not, but I can be there in my car in 5 minutes. Right. But I'm not going to go put on pants and like whatever and make myself look not disheveled and do all the different things it takes to go and actually sit and do this. So I think we need to understand as well that just because you have the option to do something online, that does not necessarily mean that you are cannibalizing. I actually think we should start to understand that maybe it's just actually a massive addition to, because if you're going to the casino, for a lot of people, it's just the experience, right? You want to go, you want to sit down, you want to you have a few cocktails, and it's a night out. It's a thing. Sure, I understand there's the problem gambling aspect there too, and those are things, like we said, that certainly need to be put into all of the thoughts and laws and everything that go into place here. But those two big things that everybody brings up as the negative, I actually think we've got to start kind of changing the narrative on these things, because they don't really, in the grand scheme of things, hold water to me.
Yeah, your casino analogy is perfect. You go to the casino with money that you plan to spend, or with a debit card that you're going to use to then take money out. You have the money in your hand. That's the money you're going to bet with. If you want to go get out, take more, you bet more. If you're at home, you are putting a couple of dollars into your account, maybe a lot of money, but it's kind of one at a time. It's different than that trip of going somewhere with the intent on spending the money. It's like, oh, I can do it right now. And I think we can look at what happened with sports betting online as it relates to in person as well. I don't hear from any of the, the sports books that I know of that, oh, we are taking less and less money because online gambling, online sports betting is legal. People still like going to the sports book, putting their ticket down at the counter, sitting there watching, making an event out of it, watching a game at a sports book as opposed to being at home. So yeah, I think there is a really big difference between the casinos and doing it at home on your couch without your pants on, to your point. And I think it's really interesting too. You hear a lot of the online gambling companies that own casinos are really worried about cannibalization, when obviously the online gambling companies that don't own casinos are saying, oh, it's not a big deal. So there's always going to be a bias on both sides there. And then as it relates to responsible gaming, I think you can look at what companies have been doing with sports betting. I think if I'm them, I'm going to try to bring the same playbook over to iCasino and iGaming, to the legislatures, and say, hey, here's everything you wanted us to do with sports betting. Here's what we've done. If this satisfies you, we're going to do that with iGaming as well, and really trying to break down that barrier of the differences or the commonalities between problem gambling as it relates to both fields, and saying kind of, we've done this with sports betting, we can do this with iGaming. And if the lawmakers and regulators aren't satisfied with what they did with sports betting, yeah, they can go back to that and try to find common ground there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Pat, one of the things we saw during the poker boom back in the day, right, was there was a lot of things talking about, oh, well, online poker, we can't do that because that's going to cannibalize. There was never more interest in sitting at a poker table in the entire world than when online poker was at the height of its powers. Like, you would have to wait forever. There were poker rooms everywhere. Everything was blowing up. Casinos were taking out the crazy, like, you would never think you would take slot machines off of a gaming floor, like the cash cow of everything. They were moving slot machines to make poker rooms. Like, it was this thing where, like, we had this crazy thought, like, oh, people aren't going to come to the casino if they can just do it at home. No, it was never more popular in casinos than whenever online poker was at the height of its powers. And so I think that we can take at least a little bit from that as well with the casino. Like, it's not the same. People like the lights and the sounds and the whatever, the slot machine. It's not the same doing it on your phone. I get it. Like, some people get enjoyment out of it, but it's certainly not, the same experience as going to a casino. And my mother will go to the casino and grind $20 on a, on a penny machine, just because, again, being there, getting the drink given to you, all the different stuff like that. And so, again, I think we have to understand that a lot of people do the in-person stuff for the experience.
No, and I think, we'll just look at both on both sides in Maryland. You got Delegate Vanessa Atterbury. She's the sponsor in the House. She says that as much when she introduces her bill. She says, this is additive. I don't gamble, but I go to the casino for the shows.
Right.
This is just another opportunity for the casinos to do something. Maybe they'll draw people in with it, but some people go to the casinos that don't gamble, me, or, whatever. And so that's one thing. On the cannibalization side, Senator Ron Watson, who's sponsoring on the Senate side, he says to the casinos that are complaining about cannibalization, he basically straight out told them, you're firing people even though you're making more money overall. Just because you're cannibalizing the brick and mortar doesn't mean you have to fire them. Your companies, you're greedy. You're firing people even though you're making more money. Like, sure, maybe they're not directly bringing in more money as a bartender or whatever, but you as a company are making more. So it's kind of an interesting kind of dichotomy there in Maryland to both of those points.
Looking interesting again on all these states, and the more states that we'll start talking about online casino. We'll keep you guys updated on all of that stuff. Again, you heard the disclaimer at the top of this. We are not stock advice. We are not financial advice. We're not financial advisors. Do not take anything that we say on this podcast and use your own money to do anything with. There we go, Sam. I've laid the floor down for you to talk about DraftKings stock.
Yeah, thank you very much for the disclaimer. DraftKings stock is always a really it's a topic that gets a lot of interest online in the financial community. We had this saying when I was at Bloomberg. It's like anything that has sports in the headline or strippers will do good on the terminal. So a lot of people on the terminal who follow the stock stuff, they love hearing about DraftKings, which is now it's down a little bit today after some news, but it opened up the week at $54, which is the highest the price has been in over 3.5 years. That came on the back of them reporting earnings, which for the fourth quarter, which showed that revenue was up 13% to $1.4 billion in the fourth quarter, beating Wall Street projections. And a lot of that came, when DraftKings and all the other sports books had what they called the worst quarter in their history in terms of betting NFL. They put out this really interesting stat. It was 10 weeks is the number of weeks that favorites won 75% or more of their games during an NFL season. And if you know anything about betting, and people like to pick, the public likes to pick favorites to win. So the fact that it happened in 10 weeks, it hasn't happened in 40 years. And DraftKings still came out with more revenue. They're showing basically investors that they are able to mitigate some of these really unlucky industry headwinds through some of the other avenues they've invested in, which is now seems to be giving the stock market at least a lot more hope as to, okay, how will they do when sports normalize, when people get less lucky? Now that NFL is over, people will probably lose money on college basketball. Some of the results they put out were very favorable so far for January and February, the first quarter of the year. Obviously, we talked about the Super Bowl and how well they did. So people are reacting very positively. I think one of the big stories here is they paid $750 million for Jackpocket last year. This is the online lottery courier service. Basically, you can buy an online lottery ticket online, and then someone will send it to you. So it's a way to kind of bring the lottery online. And that really helped them expand their customer base. They had about 4 million customers per month during the quarter, which was up 36%. That did have an impact on revenue per customer. People are spending less on lottery tickets than they do on sports betting or iGaming. But it's another one of those avenues they're really focusing now on trying to explore how do we make more money out of this, how to convert more people to do it. And then live betting was also a really big focus for them. They paid about $200 million to acquire Simplebet, which is a micro market specialist company. So that's kind of the next frontier we've heard these companies talk about. And the banks have reacted positively as well. It's not just Wall Street. Macquarie and Truist and Stifel, they all raised their target prices for DraftKings to about $60 per share, citing how well they did despite all these results. Deutsche Bank came out and said, maybe we need to cool it a little bit on how well they did. We don't know if they're going to have another unlucky quarter. There's some things I want to talk to Pat about in terms of legislation on the horizon. I think it's really interesting that all these companies like DraftKings are saying that we're not predicting that more states will legalize iGaming, but we're making a lot more money off of it. So that's telling in terms of legislation and how legislation will do. We're not hearing the companies like DraftKings being as optimistic yet. But one thing that Deutsche Bank pointed out was, hey, Ohio, New Jersey, Maryland, their governors have all recently talked about at least an appetite to increase online gaming taxes, whether it's sports betting or iGaming. And they think that's something that's being overlooked. So I don't know, how is that legislation doing compared to everything else that the industry has to worry about? Because every time you talk, it's a million different states, a million different things. So I'm just wondering how that's popping up.
Oh. Yeah, Pat, just kind of like, commenting, your thoughts here just on, again, not just where DraftKings is right now, but the fact of the matter is we kind of know what the next step is, obviously, for this thing to explode, right? And that is, again, more iGaming, right? And so while they aren't necessarily saying this is definitely going to happen, they are at least floating out there that there is an appetite for it in multiple states in which they are legalized. Yeah,
no, there's certainly an appetite for it. And you can see different states with the voter polls out there saying, they want these options. To Sam's point, the tax hikes are kind of a scary road bump out there probably for them. Maryland governor wants to double the tax rate. The Ohio governor, who already doubled the tax rate from 10 to 20%, wants to double it again to 40%. And these are in the budget talks. So, I mean, that's pretty, like, this is what they want to do. And if, as long as the legislators okay with it, they will get done. So I don't know, that might not bode great for them, at least in the short term.
Yeah, for sure.
It seems to be something that everyone's kind of overlooking right now is
Mhm.
just kind of the small tidbit of, hey, we could have these huge tax increases, and as it relates to iGaming, is that going to be a negotiating chip they have to
Mhm.
sacrifice? But everyone besides Deutsche Bank isn't talking about that. They're talking about how well DraftKings is doing. But maybe there's some things that are being overlooked right now. But obviously the stock is doing tremendous. So we'll see. This will be a make or break year for them. Everyone says, but everyone says that every year.
It
Everyone
has
says
been.
that.
It's been so fun to watch them as a roller coaster stock. Anyway, just everything they've done from the surcharge that they announced and then pulled back, and
Yeah, well,
everything.
that's already gone. People
Yeah,
forgot about
yeah.
that.
Yeah. That
Short cycle.
that was a story for like 72 hours, and then it was just like we never talked about it again. Like it was
Nope.
there,
News
it was
cycle.
gone. Yeah, it was awesome how that worked out for them. All right, Pat, let's get to our normal little state roundup that we do. We have information coming to you guys from Texas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, and Hawaii.
Talk about states or ideas that could help these companies in the stock market. Texas, I think, is a huge one. Potentially the largest handle state out there by plenty of people's estimates. A new House bill was introduced. It's a very simple bill. It just amends the Constitution, so it does need a massive amount of votes in both sides of the legislature, and then the voters need to approve it at the ballot. Again, very simple, just kind of outlines that state professional sports teams, organization that held an annual PGA Tour event before January 1st and a Class 1 racetrack in operation, they could have licenses. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then basically from there, the rest of the regulations, if it's approved at the polls, would need to be set up. What does that ultimately mean? Again, we've talked a lot on here about the momentum that's happening in Texas. Lots and lots of kind of pieces coming into play, including Governor Greg Abbott saying, he's not going to stand in its way. However, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who still gets to decide what gets voted on in the Senate, is still anti-sports betting, anti-gambling expansion, and that has yet to change. So there's kind of that just a movable object at the moment, which will hinder Texas movement forward. Minnesota, that state is insane. I mean, it's been year after year, the last 5 years of, is it going to get done? Mm-hmm. These parties need to come together and shake hands and kiss babies and have some sort of compromise. And last year we heard at the last minute that there was a deal on the table, but we're going to run out of time to vote, so it's no go. This year they all come together. The first committee hearing was last week. Senator Matt Klein came in. He said, I'm putting this amendment on the table. This brings the Republicans in, so everybody's on board. There were a bunch of testifiers on board, from the racetracks to the charity organizations to you name it, basically, saying, yeah, we're on board. And then we had a bunch of senators come out and say, no, we can't do this. We're worried about problem gambling. We're worried about the financial impact because they have a huge budget surplus in Minnesota, so it's not like they need the revenue. And so it ended up a 6-6 vote in this committee. It stalled out. It doesn't mean it's dead. They can bring it back, but it's almost less progress than we've seen, despite having the deal that we've talked about needing. It's not moving. So it's kind of crazy stuff there. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, a state that's one of 2 states with no legal gaming, has passed 2 committees now, a sports betting bill. And now there's actual kind of talk saying, hey, we're receptive to this. We can see that this could be beneficial to regulate it and have it in the light and things like that. The governor's been sort of open to it. I don't think it gets to the finish line either this year because of just its history, but kind of interesting to see any sort of movement in Hawaii beyond, last year was the first time it moved beyond a committee since 2019, and now it's moved by 2. So that's kind of a big, significant push there. In Oklahoma, kind of another one of those states that it seems like it could get done, because all that really needs to happen is the tribes need to be on the same page as Governor Kevin Stitt. That's not happening still, and they want exclusivity. Stitt told local media recently, or Stitt's office anyway, that the governor will not okay any tribal-only sports betting. So it seems like even though a bill has passed a committee again, which it has in the past, it's not going to go anywhere because of those disagreements with the different parties at play. So, I mean, there's a reason these states that we continue to talk about haven't passed, and all those things continue to come back up. I'm sure we'll talk about Georgia soon in the coming weeks because they've had a bill introduced again and just continue to kind of have stalemates. There's a reason they haven't passed. There's a reason, we're at this kind of slowed down stalemate of, 10 or so states that haven't legalized yet.
As all sports bettors out there know, I would say of this list, Hawaii deserves to go ahead and legalize, considering so many nights are decided on Hawaii games, like the late night Hawaii games. It's the last thing that you can possibly bet on in the entire United States. And like Hawaii plays such a big role in sports betting, even though people don't ever talk about it. Hawaii needs legalized sports betting. All right. Like, you play this significant role in all of our lives. We want you to be a part of all of this with us. For sure. Guys, real quick, as we close this out, I just wanted to get y'all's opinion on this as we continue to talk about these sports books and what they're doing. Of course, we know the same game parlay product. We know that there's trying to be enhancements to all of that. We know the things that are going on and the different stuff that has happened over the last, 18 months to 2 years with these sports books trying to acquire new customers or drum up business from customers that they already have. I wanted to get just y'all's thoughts, if you had anything that came to mind, on what you think some of these sports books could do to perhaps drum up some more business out there as we kind of move into, like you said, I mean, it seems like every year is a make or break year, but as we move into kind of crunch time for some of these businesses, Sam, we'll start with you. Like, did anything come to the top of your head that you kind of thought, hey man, what if they tried this, or what if they did this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The two things that came up immediately were based off what DraftKings is saying about, the $750 million they spent on Jackpocket, which is a lot of money, especially for a company that hadn't had a profitable year until this past year. And they're already doing a tremendous job in terms of using it for customer growth. So I think that pointing to that as an example of kind of an alternate stream, an alternate path to not just only getting money from people, but using it to grow your customer base and your greater kind of betting ecosystem in general. DraftKings is really the only one who's taken that leap so far. And they're kind of talking about it as that next space, similar to DFS, right? Where we're going to get these people signed up in states like Texas, get these people signed up in states like California, where there are lotteries. And then once we turn on legalized sports betting, eventually, if that ever happens, people will have the DraftKings app on their phone. They'll know the brand. So I think I would be surprised if other companies didn't try similar approaches. It doesn't have to be an online lottery that they buy, but another kind of stream, another avenue to get that brand awareness in states before either sports betting or iGaming is legalized. And the other thing that came to mind is what the number one company in the space is doing, FanDuel. We've seen them spend tons of money on FanDuel Sports Network. Now, basically, if you're watching League Pass or the NHL equivalent, you're watching the local channels. It's all FanDuel Sports. It's not Valley Sports anymore. They've spent a ton of money with their partnerships with various media brands at a time when kind of everyone else is saying, we're going to let those partnerships fall off. They're not making us any money. So interesting that FanDuel is the number one leader kind of in the space, and they're zagging when everyone else is zigging and trying to cut money. So I kind of have been wondering for a while, what is all the end goal here? It can't be just about having your brand in the corner of a sports broadcast. There has to be something more beyond that. I'm really interested to see what they do kind of next in this media space. And then if, other companies like Fanatics, an ESPN bet is a whole nother story. But if they kind of say, hey, maybe this media path is good to invest in right now when everyone else has kind of gotten out.
Pat, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I love that thought, and that's the thing we've talked about a lot. I mean, the initial wave had all those ad and partnerships and network partnerships, and even I can't even remember it now. The one that was integrating with its TV system was that Fubo.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. But yeah, obviously the prediction markets, I think, are something to look at potentially. I mean, they're going to let these California and Texas get kind of taken up by those operators without trying. So that could be interesting. The other thing is, I remember talking about early on in the whole wave too of, the partnerships with NASCAR and the PGA and MLB, and how do you get bettors more interested in these fringe sports, not fringe, but, less
Right.
popular sports. How do you maybe re-enter that idea now that we're looking so much at parlays and stuff? How do you kind of generate that interest back up and get bettors there, especially say the summer slow times?
Yeah.
I think that's an interest, because that was a huge topic of conversation in 2019, 2020, of all these other sports that don't get that much action. How do you get more action on them? Because they can be fun, hole by hole betting.
Yeah.
I mean, Matt, you know all about your golf betting. I don't.
Yeah.
But
Honestly, you stole, like you took the idea right out of my brain. I mean, my mind to this was, how do you get more action on sports that aren't the NFL, right? I mean, how do you get more action on some of these other sports that kind of, I go back to golf. Golf is like built for betting, right? I mean, it's a 4-day sweat. You can come in and bet each individual round. There's so much time between when a guy tees off and by the time he gets to his next shot. In game is absolutely perfect. I mean, golf is paced perfectly for that. I know that ESPN did, at least they are going to be launching these companion broadcasts, right, for 6 tournaments this year. So they will have like a air quote betcast that's going on for 6 different tournaments to test that out. I think that's a step in the right direction. You mentioned NASCAR. I think that that's something that where, look, I'm not a NASCAR guy. I know, shocker. Even though I grew up in Louisiana, I know everyone just assumes that because I grew up in Louisiana that I'm like, oh yeah, I love watching them turn left. Keep on turning left and changing tires. But no, I'm not. It's not my thing. But there is something. The last little bit of Daytona 500, right? I mean, there's these wrecks, right? It was excitement, and these guys cross the finish. How do you capitalize on the excitement part of those races? I get it. There's a lot of monotony in it, but is there a way to do that? I don't know. I don't know the answer to all of that. But how do we get people micro betting in baseball, right? Because I mean, there is a decent amount of time between pitches and stuff. If we can get latency down on broadcasts and things that certainly is a way to go with all that. So yeah, it's the tapping in to these other sports, non-NFL. You can just turn the NFL on, right? I mean, turn the NFL on, people are going to bet it. That's fine. But everything else, where do you do that, right? I mean, this USA Canada hockey game, I think is going to be the best thing for hockey betting. It might be the biggest bet game of the year. Seriously, an all-star game might end up being the biggest bet hockey game of the year, right? Because we got interest around it, right? Thanks to the players for fighting 3 times in 9 seconds, but still, we got interest in it, right? And so everyone's like, oh hell, my friends who are not hockey fans are like, oh shit, should I be watching this? Whatever. And so they go in and start watching it. So I think that there's, what can the industry do, right, to kind of get that going? And that is to me the real question here, because I think that there is something. I just don't know what the magic bullet is.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I just don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
How do you capitalize on that engagement?
Yeah.
How do you capitalize on that engagement?
Yeah. So we'll certainly keep kind of throwing some ideas around for you guys over the course of the year. See if anything ever comes to mind with all of this. I am interested to see what the broadcast networks end up doing with the various other sports, right? Because like I said, you can turn the NFL on, it works. What are we going to do for baseball season when it rolls around? We already seen at least a little bit of stuff moving on the golf side of things. Can you lean into other stuff? WNBA is coming up. What, all these different things. Can you get into some of these other sports and get people involved in all of those? Guys, as always, everything we do, absolutely free. We do appreciate your support. So please hit that subscribe button. And if you are so inclined, if you would like to leave a rating and a review, so long it is no longer if it's lower than 4 stars, it's fine. You can turn us off right now. That's fine. But anything 4 and higher, we'll take it. If you want to go in, throw that in there. We do appreciate that as well. It helps us climb the charts and more people can find this very here podcast. Head over to LegalSportsReport.com for all of the written articles and stuff that we talk about here on the pod. Please go in and support all the great work Pat, Sam, and the whole crew over there get every week for you guys. They watch, they listen, they summarize so that you don't have to. For Pat, for Sam, I am Matt. Talk to you guys next week.